KMC,
HD3 Detroit,
KJAQ,
HD3 Seattle,
WBMX,
HD3 Boston, and on AOL Radio and Yahoo Launchcast. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
Why do people sometimes see ghosts of themselves? Have you ever had friends swear that they saw you in this or that place when you knew you were somewhere else? What is the doppelganger? Well, welcome to the 130th broadcast of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Paul, and I'm without my son and paranormal partner this evening because he's on the Navajo Reservation in northeastern Arizona for the next week and is generally not reachable by phone. A long story and a subject for an upcoming show, definitely. We'll see what he learns out there. So this evening I thought we'd delve into an area of the paranormal where many fear to tread, the frightening realm of the doppelganger. Now that's a compound word from German literature, which literally translates as double goer. What is human fear all about? What are we truly afraid of, and why? That great writer of cosmic horror stories, H.P. Lovecraft, my fellow Rhode Islander and a distant cousin, said that what most terrifies the human spirit is a disruption in the fabric of time and space. We feel secure because life, for most of us, is predictable. It may be dreary at times, but it's not going to turn around and break the rules. It's not going to turn around and swallow us. The sun will continue to rise in the east. We'll continue to have 2 hands and 10 fingers. We'll, I suppose, continue to look in the mirror and see the same face day after day, changing predictably over a period of years. But what if it doesn't? And what if we don't? To me, the doppelganger is the ultimate symbol of this horrifying disruption, this thin veneer of false security as we swirl through universes of parallel worlds where anything can and will and does happen. The doppelganger is most often manifested as someone's double, triple, or even more. People see them literally as ghosts of themselves, or even as perfectly solid doubles. There are cases where people are seen and positively identified in 2, 3, or even more places at the same time. There are cases in which groups of people have observed a person and his or her doppelganger within sight of each other, each doing different things and apparently unaware of the other's presence. Famous people such as the British poet Percy Shelley and U.S. President Abraham Lincoln reported seeing their own doppelgangers. On the most visceral level, then, the doppelganger is probably one of the scariest phenomena in paranormal experience. Now, the more or less official definition of a doppelganger, taken from the Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits by our friend and occasional guest, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, says this. She has it under the listing of double. The apparition of a living person that is an exact duplicate, even including details of dress. Doubles fall into 2 general categories: death omens and a type of possible out-of-body projection or bilocation done either consciously or unconsciously. The belief that doubles are death omens flourishes in the folklore of Britain and Europe. Doubles are known by a variety of names, including wraith, fetch, that's F-E-T-C-H, like you'd say to your dog, waff, fi, swarth, and task. In Germany, doubles are called doppelganger or double-goer. As a death omen, doubles typically are seen by others in a distant location, just as the individual in question is about to die or has died. The double may appear real or have a filmy, ghostly look about it. In some rare cases, individuals see their own doubles shortly before they die. Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet to whom I just referred, saw his double shortly before he drowned. Catherine the Great of Russia saw her double seated upon her own throne and ordered her guards to fire upon it. A little bit of self-hatred there, huh? Not all cases of doubles are harbingers of death. Some seem to be projections of consciousness that somehow assume visible form. Mystics and adepts are said to have the ability to project themselves or bilocate at will. Others who project their doubles may not be aware they are doing so. Many cases collected by psychical researchers remain unexplained. The belief that the spirit or soul exists in a visible double is ancient and widespread, particularly among animistic societies. And we goes on for a bit more. Now, aside from the fact that the definition seems oblivious to the multiverse or multiple worlds theories that Ben and I apply in our research, it also seems to ignore something else that we've noticed. My experience is that doppelgangers can also be what we call parasites, commonly known in folklore as demons. And that's illustrated in the first case I ever had that involved a doppelganger. And now, of course, let me just say before I tell you about that case that in fairness to my good friend Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who wrote that definition in or before 1992, she has since come to accept the multiverse interpretation as a distinct possibility, and we've talked about that on the show. But it is clear from any definition that the doppelganger can be many things and can possibly have many explanations. Now, the case I'm referring to was one involving a young girl named Lucy, who was a pretty 15-year-old girl in Glastonbury, Connecticut. Now, she had become interested in the Ouija board a friend had given her as a present, and she became fascinated by the quote-unquote spirit world and with the quote-unquote spirit guide she communicated with over the board, and by other divining methods. Now, divining methods can mean anything that's supposed to foretell the future or any sort of thing of that kind. Now, Lucy's older brother became interested as well. Now, after he joined the Navy, this is in 1975, by the way, the family was startled by certain phenomena that began late that year and went on early into 1976. Now, phenomena seemed to follow Lucy around, and on several occasions, members of the family saw a ghostly figure with long blonde hair, usually leaning over Lucy's bed while the girl was asleep. The girl later told me, and a friend who was working with me at the time on cases, that she herself had seen this doppelganger. On one occasion, she was looking into a mirror and saw herself twice. Right? This did not seem to frighten her very interestingly. Now, this doppelganger thing even occurred at the family's vacation home in Block Island, which is here in Rhode Island off our coast. Loud bangings would be heard around the house, and minor poltergeist phenomena began to take place at the home in Glastonbury, Connecticut, and also at the vacation home on Block Island when they were there. Now, while Lucy was visiting it, bizarre happenings also took place at an 18th century home in nearby Coventry, Connecticut, in which her boyfriend's sister lived. An orange glowing ball-type apparition was seen on one of these occasions, almost like one of these orbs. Now, a concerned friend of Lucy's approached me after one of my lectures and asked for help. Interestingly, Lucy thought the phenomena were fascinating, and she wasn't afraid in the least. As she told me herself, this is something I hear very often from victims, quote-unquote, of everything from this to poltergeist activity. They brought her recognition, along with mystery and adventure in an otherwise ordinary life. You start to use one of these Ouija boards, and maybe you're, sort of a drabby-looking person, or you don't have much of an interesting life, but cosmic entities are paying attention to me and making me feel important. Well, this is what you're doing is you're being a hot lunch, in my opinion, for parasites, who will often use your pride or your lack of interest in much else in life to get to you, to use you as a smorgasbord, so to speak. Anyway, more about that later. Anyway, after interviews and visits to both the Lucy's residence and her family and the house in Coventry, the farmhouse, it was clear to me that paranormal phenomena were indeed taking place, and I blamed the Ouija board for this. Now, I myself felt the psychic cold associated with these phenomena, witnessed sounds and minor poltergeist activity, though I never myself saw the doppelganger that I can recall, and I'm certainly sure I would recall it, and it would be in my notes had I done so. Now, this is interesting, too, because with me, I don't know why, but everybody talks about this psychic cold. This is one of the rare occasions in the past 40 years since I began my research that I've ever felt that psychic cold. I don't know why. People have told me, in their houses, they brought me into rooms that were, one place even used it as a refrigerator because it was always so cold in there. a particular room. But it's just not one of the things that I pick up. Why, again, I don't know. But anyway, the first time I was being shown around that Coventry farmhouse, the girl was there. Lucy was there with us, several of her friends. A venerable farmstead surrounded by fields and stables, lovely place. Something followed us around the house, turning on lights as we went. At one point, I turned around and followed it, led by this trail of coal. Again, it was very pronounced in this case. And this entity led me into a corner room and then dissipated. Now, whether this was the doppelganger, I didn't see it. Sure as heck felt it. Now, would that all cases were so simple to cure. These people were Roman Catholics. Prayers read with the family at their home and a blessing with holy water by a priest were followed by the destruction of the Ouija board. We literally went out and burned the thing, broke it up and burned it. Because if you don't burn it, somebody else is going to use it, some other poor schmuck. Now, all of this psychologically eased the family. Lucy vowed to renounce all occult practices, and with this, the Glastonbury case ended with no further reports of paranormal activity. Well, that certainly seemed to be the case because even in those days, my early salad days, I made it a point to follow up very regularly with everyone. Today, Ben and I work on cases for years, but in this case, we did follow, and seemingly everything was fine. She sort of learned her lesson. Now, and of course, the toughest thing to do is to break people away from their own egos if they feel that this is something that they are being almost isn't making their lives interesting and is making it doing away with the dreariness. But when things get really seriously scary, then people will often be more open to breaking away from this stimulus here, such as the Ouija board. Now, here we have a double of the main victim in what I later would call a parasite case. And I've seen this phenomenon on a number of occasions, particularly ones that began with Ouija boards. As do mimics in nature, predators, energy predators in this case, take on the form of something harmless to the victim. Now, when the intelligent, quick-learning, but often two-dimensional minds of some parasite species, what could be more harmless to victims than the images of the victims themselves? Possible explanation for a doppelganger, at least in this case. Another possibility is that the victim simply projects its own image onto the entity, and the entity accepts it. We've seen evidence of that. In other cases, we might simply have the multiverse in action, with all the electromagnetic energies that are stirred up in significant paranormal situations. It's certainly possible that world membranes thin, and people simply glimpse each other or themselves going about parallel lives nearby. Well, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back on the subject of the doppelganger here on Behind the Paranormal on CBS New Sky Radio and newskyradio.com. See you in a minute.
Acclaimed sound healer, author, and radio host Mark Pattison brings you a weekly inspirational message with your 11-minute miracle, followed by the best mediums, psychics, and best-selling self-help authors. Join us for the best new thought program out there. It's called Dynamic Transformations with Mark Patterson. It's Monday from 9 to 10 Eastern, exclusively on CBS Radio's PsychicOnAir.com, powered by CBS.
How the hell do we wind up like this? Why weren't we able to see the signs that we missed? And try to turn the tables. I wish you'd unclench your fists and unpack your suitcase. Lately there's been too much of this, but don't think it's too late. Nothing's wrong, just as long as you know that someday I will. Someday, somehow, gonna be alright, but not right now. I know you're wondering where you knows that someday, somehow, gonna be alright, but not right now. I know you're wondering where. Well, I hope that since we're here anyway, we could end up saying things we've always needed to say, so we could end up staying. Now the story's played out like this, just like a paperback novel. Let's rewrite an ending that fits instead of a Hollywood horror. Nothing's wrong, just as long as you know that someday I will. Someday, somehow, gonna be alright, but not right now. I know you're wondering Turn the tables. Now the story's played out like this. Just like a paperback novel. Let's rewrite an ending that fits. Instead of a Hollywood horror. Nothing's wrong, just as long as you know that someday I will. Someday, somehow, gonna make it alright, but not right now. I know you're wondering where the only one who knows that someday, somehow, gonna make it alright, but not right now.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com.
Well, welcome back, and we're talking about doppelgangers today on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, minus the Ben, who was on the Navajo Reservation in northeast Arizona, learning from the Navajo people, and we'll be talking about that some other show. But in the meantime, the line is open here, so feel free to jump in, especially if you have your own doppelganger story. And I'll repeat the number, 248-545-SOUL or 248-545-7685, or if you're listening on a handy little computer, use the instant feedback feature to the right of your screen as you listen live. Now, probably the most significant case of the doppelganger in European paranormal research was that of Emily Sauguet, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, who was a French school teacher working at a high-class school for girls in Latvia in the 1840s. Now, what happened there was supposedly witnessed by over 50 people, and it was recorded by a journalist, an American writer, actually Robert Dale Owen, who lived from 1801 to 1877, and he is considered a reliable source of things like this. So take it as you wish, and here we go. I'm going to have to sort of brush up on my sort of rusty German here. There was a one of the greatest, or at least witnesses to this, was one of the students, and her name was Julie von Guldenstube, I believe it's pronounced, the second daughter of the Baron von Guldenstube, who was 13 years old, her, not the Baron, in 1845, and attended a school that I just mentioned in Latvia. Now, this French teacher who was hired there was Mademoiselle Emily Sauguet, who joined the staff there in 1845, and it was her who was the apparent source or subject or victim of the doppelganger. Now, the French teacher here, Emily, was described as a fair-skinned, a 32-year-old woman with chestnut hair and blue eyes, and was fairly tall and slim. The students described her as having a very sweet and lovable nature. They all liked her. And the big cheeses at the school were entirely pleased with her work and were impressed by her intelligence, good attitude, and education. Everything looked pretty good for her career as Emily came into the school and started to teach there. But within a couple of weeks of her arrival, she became the focus of rumor and gossip, and it seemed that Emily, to all intents and purposes, could be literally in two places at once. If she was reported to be in a particular part of the school, somebody would contradict, saying, "Oh, I didn't see her there. She can't be there. I was just passed around the stairs or in some distant corridor." And individual students repeated this sort of confusion time and time again, and the teachers just dismissed it as the girls just, being mistaken or some kind of silly foolishness. But naturally, the most excitement was caused by the rumors that followed the first appearance of the doppelganger to a number of witnesses. Okay, now Emily was giving a lesson to Julie and 12 other girls in a classroom, and the subject of the lesson varied slightly with who was telling the story, but everybody did agree that Emily was teaching energetically at the blackboard, and suddenly, standing beside her at the blackboard was a second Emily, who materialized, so it was described, at her side. The two were exactly alike and went through the same movements, synchronizing perfectly. The only difference was that the real Emily had chalk in her hand, but the doppelganger had none. It merely mimed the teacher's action as she wrote on the board, it was reported. This story caused a great sensation at the school, particularly as all 13 students in the class agreed precisely in their description of what they had seen. In the following weeks, the doppelganger was seen on a number of occasions. For instance, it appeared at dinner, standing behind Emily and imitating her movements as she ate. But as in the classroom, the double's hands were empty. On these occasions, the students were not alone in seeing Emily's doppelganger. The servants also reportedly saw the figure behind the chair as well. Okay, well, one of Julie's school friends was badly frightened by the doppelganger appearance, and that was Antoine Yvonne Wrangel was her name, according to the report. And she was in a group invited to a local fair and she was ready to getting dressed in her room to go to this fair, and Emily, the teacher, was helping her to fasten her dress. And there was a mirror hanging behind them, and Anthony later said that she turned toward the mirror and caught sight of two identical, here's this mirror again, women of Emily's description, each doing up her dress. Startled, she fainted clean away, the poor kid. So anyway, the doppelganger did not always mirror Emily's actions. Sometimes, as Julie reported, it would behave quite independently. For example, the real Emily would rise from her chair, but her double would remain seated. Ms. Von Wrangel and a group of friends looked after Emily when she was taken ill with a serious cold one time, and the girls took turns reading to her as she recovered in bed. This Anthony... the girl was alone with Emily when she noticed the color suddenly drained from Emily's face. And the girl said that she was so pale that she seemed about to faint. And the girl asked if she was feeling worse. Emily answered in a weak voice that she was not, but her frightened look alarmed the girl. And a few moments later, the girl looked up from her book to see the doppelganger walking up and down the room, apparently in excellent health. This is interesting. There have been several cases that I've run into in which the doppelganger has looked great and the person who is not the doppelganger has been sick, or vice versa. I'm not quite sure what that means. This time, the little Von Wrangel kid remained calm and didn't tell Emily what she had seen. And when she came downstairs from Emily's room, she told the other kids exactly what she had experienced. And on that occasion, there had been only that one witness, of course, but the next and most remarkable appearance of this doppelganger was witnessed by the entire school. This time, there were reportedly 42 students gathered in the school hall to do some sort of activity, and their four windows were open onto a corridor leading to the large garden in front of the house. So everybody could see this garden. The weather was pretty good, and the girls had a clear view of the place when Emily could be seen suddenly coming into the garden and picking flowers. The girls sat around a long table, and the teacher sat at one end of the table supervising whatever they were doing. After a little while, she got up to leave them alone for some reason. Now, the chair did not remain empty for long, however, because here comes the doppelganger. Emily appeared in the chair. The girls turned their eyes to the garden, and sure enough, there was Emily. Although still gathering flowers, her movements were slow and languid, as though, as the girls later remarked, she'd suddenly become overcome with fatigue. Okay, again, interesting situation with these two figures, each kind of slowing down as if they're sharing energy or something. Now, all the while, the doppelganger sat there silent, motionless. Now, although they were pretty scared, the girls were getting used to the strange phenomena, and two of the boldest among them decided to take a closer look at this doppelganger. They approached the chair, determined to touch this apparition. Now, stretching out their hands, they encountered a slight resistance in the air surrounding it, like a thin film of muslin or papier-mâché might offer. Now, this is very interesting because I've had this same experience. On several occasions, I have had occasion to have, I suppose, tactile contact with an entity, and I have noticed this very thing, a slight resistance in the air surrounding it. I mentioned on previous shows my experience with a poltergeist case in Connecticut, in which I physically was pushed by this thing, and I pushed back, and I felt not only this resistance described here, but I also felt bone structure here. And this, I guess, one of the many things that pushes me toward this idea that these are not spirits at all, but actual creatures from parallel universes, and this resistance in the air. And sometimes what comes out in photographs as bright light or a bright membrane is precisely that, a membrane between worlds, and that these worlds are very close to us. So anyway, this is what this might be. That struck me because that was what I've experienced. Now, one girl tried to pass between the chair and the table and stepped right through the figure in the chair. Interesting. Emily's double did not react to any of this and remained seated until a short time later it slowly disappeared. And as before, the girls turned to the garden to watch the real Emily gathering flowers with her usual sort of enthusiasm. Now, all 42 girls agreed on what they had witnessed, and some questioned their teacher soon after, and they asked how she felt in the garden and if she had experienced anything weird. Well, Emily answered that she had noticed the other teacher leaving the girls unattended, and she'd been, the first teacher that was, who was in the hall. And Emily had had a clear view of the whole place and the empty chair and remembered recalling that the girls should not have been left alone and should have been supervised. So did she project this thing onto them or into that chair? Well, it's very possible. Now, this, again, is a well-attested story. I don't know that it is true or that all of it is true. It is generally considered to be relatively reliable, but, again, who knows? Things do tend to get embellished over the years, but this fellow Owen, this American journalist, did interview girls relatively soon after these events occurred. Now, the problem with Emily and her future career was that this happened wherever she went, and her career as a teacher suffered because kids just couldn't take it, and they'd freak, and they'd leave the school. So whatever happened to her in the end, I don't know, but it is, again, an example of a pretty nifty or scary, depending on your point of view, doppelganger. Now, again, we don't know how common this is. I suspect in conversations that I've had with people that it is far more common than we might suspect. When you see someone you know walking down the street, how do you know it's really them? The multiverse acts in mysterious ways its wonders to perform. I often use when I open my book, Footsteps in the Attic. One of the opening stories is, how many times has it happened? You look in the rear view mirror and some cowboy's down there trying to pass you, maybe even honking, and all of a sudden you look and it's gone. And there's no place the dope could have turned. So, again, who knows? So, moving along here, one of my own doppelganger cases, again, which I've often mentioned on the air, seems to me to be a textbook illustration of parallel lives and parallel people, so to speak. And this is, of course, the case that I talk about a lot in Maine in 1978, in which a young girl was very far away from, if this you can call this a doppelganger, very far away from her double, and she herself was a student. And I had always referred to this sort of phenomenon as the haunter. Now, I used to think that was some kind of an urban legend, like alligators in the sewers or something, until I ran into the case myself. The haunter came into my world in October of 1978 when I was, was just out of graduate school and had zero and was living in a little rented cottage by a lake. And the phone rang one day, and it was a very worried young woman from the University of Connecticut. And I'll call her Janice. And she and her older sister Patricia were both students at UConn nearby, and had spent a few days with their friends in southern Maine a few weekends before this. The four of them had a scare that the girl told me would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And when you hear it, you can see why. This is how Jan recounted it. She said that her sister Pat had always been big on reincarnation and dreams and all this deja vu and things occult. And every now and then they would be somewhere and the girl would come out with something about this or that being familiar. And here's my notes say, the quote here, "We were driving down this old road in Maine when Pat suddenly screamed. She scared the fecal matter out of us. Stop, stop," she yelled. There was a Joey, Janice's boyfriend, was driving, and he hit the brakes. Pat was, quote, "white as a ghost," unquote, Jan said. And Pat yelled, "Oh, my God," and pointed at this house maybe 100 feet back from the road. Everybody's skin was crawling by this time, according to Jan, who noted that the house was white, only about 10 years old, and had a rather neglected yard. "I know this house. This is my house," Pat yelled, and she leaped out of the car, according to her sister. Now, terrified and convinced that her sister finally had lost it, Jan and the boys tore after her but didn't catch up with her until she started pounding on the front door of this place. Door opened just as the trio were trying to pull Pat away from the porch. And Jan told me that what happened next would be seared into her memory, quote, "until the day I die." with that, we're going to take a break. Come right back, because we're going to finish the story of this doppelganger here on Behind the Paranormal on CBS New Sky Radio.
Psychic Radio. Para X with Dave and Tommy Jones on Psychic Radio.
This is Dave.
And this is Tom. And if you want to hear everything about paranormal, ghosts, spirits, UFO, you've got to tune into your radio show.
Don't guess. Tune in and you'll find out all about it. That's every Sunday, 8 until 10 p.m. Eastern on Parax Radio on Psychic Radio, powered by CBS.
Psychic Radio. PsychicOnAir.com. We know you're listening. Look for Psychic Radio on your AOL radio player.
Hello, baby, hello. Haven't seen your face for a while. Have you quit doing time for me? Or are you still the same spoiled child? Hello, I said hello. Is this the only place you thought to go? Am I the only man you ever had? Or am I just the last surviving friend that you know? Harmony and me, we're pretty good company. Looking for an island in our boat upon the sea. Harmony, gee, I really love you and I wanna love you forever. I dream of never, never, never leaving harmony. Harmony, gee, I really love you and I wanna love you forever. I dream of never, never, never leaving harmony. Hello, baby, hello. Open up your heart and let your feelings flow. You're not lucky knowing me, keeping the speed real slow. In any case, I set my own pace by stealing the show. Say hello, hello. Harmony and me, we're pretty good company. Looking for an island in our boat upon the sea. Harmony, gee, I really love you and I wanna love you forever. I dream of never, never, never leaving harmony. Never leaving harmony. 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 Harmony.
Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. New skyradio.com. Believe.
Okay, here we are again, and we're talking about doppelgangers this evening. I'm without my son because he's on this reservation down there in Navajo Reservation in Arizona and learning, I hope, and progressing in his spiritual life. But in the meantime, we're talking about doppelgangers tonight, people's doubles that are seen sometimes in the multiples of two and all sorts of scary stuff that goes on regarding that. And I'm talking about this famous case in Maine I've talked about many times on the show as one that really taught me a few lessons in 1978, 1979. And we broke just at the point where this young girl who experienced this said it would be seared into her memory until the day I die. And they were running up to a house here in Maine that the young girl recognized somehow. And the woman who answered the door took one look at Janice's sister, who was telling me this story, screamed and went stumbling back into the house. A man came to the door. He couldn't speak when he saw Pat standing there. Now, in the meantime, Pat herself had recovered a little bit and apologized for startling the people or disturbing them, and started to explain her feeling that she knew the house. And the woman, as Jan told me, was still shaking like a leaf. But the man, as pale as ever, found his voice at last, and he said, he kind of stuttered, I wouldn't be surprised if you did know this house. It's you. It's haunted by you. For God's sake, please go. And even with that, the man and woman continued to stare at Pat in absolute fascination, now seeming almost reluctant to shut the door. Now, one of the guys took charge here, and Joyce said, I'm sorry to bother you. We started pulling everybody down the path and back to the car. And even as they drove away, the couple continued to stand in their doorway and gaze at them, right? And Jan told me on the phone, we never found out what this was all about, but it was scary as hell. Pat's been depressed and scared ever since. Well, needless to say, this case captured my imagination, and the first thing I did was interview Pat. It was on October 20th, 1978. She claimed she had been dreaming about this house for at least a year. And interestingly, the dreams had stopped as soon as she actually encountered the place. And my notes here say the Pat quote, there were a couple of different dreams about my being in the house. I had one at least once a week, and they almost always stayed with me. She told me in one common dream she'd be walking down the stairs toward the front door. She'd stop halfway down, startled by something she couldn't identify. And in another, she'd be standing in the living room, gazing out a picture window at children playing in the yard. Now, this is interesting because these people in this house had no children, all right? And here's Pat in this dream. Pat in the dream saying that she had children in the yard. In still another sequence Pat described, she was in the front yard looking toward the house, and it was because of this last sequence that Pat said she recognized the house when she came upon it around the corner in the car. Now, what I found most interesting was that in the dreams, the house belonged to Pat. And she was adamant about that, and she was very sure that the children she saw from the front window, 2 boys and a girl, were her kids. Now, obviously, she's in this conscious life. She's a college student at UConn. She didn't have any kids. As a matter of fact, Pat told me that when she first saw this house from the road that day, the question, how come there aren't any toys in the yard, flashed through her mind for an instant. Now, Pat struck me as imaginative and kind of superstitious, but not abnormal. She came across as very sincere. And with her permission, I called upon my old friend and teacher, Father John Kiley, a Roman Catholic priest and psychologist, who arranged a thorough psychiatric evaluation at the Institute of Living in Hartford, which I believe still exists as part of Hartford Hospital. In the meantime, I was determined to track down the couple in Maine who had been struck with such abject horror at Patricia's very presence. So fortunately, Jan had caught a name in the mailbox. The town they were driving through at the time, she said, was York, Maine, southern Maine. Now, in an uncanny stroke of luck, which does happen to me now and then, my mother's family had owned a vacation home at nearby York Beach for nearly a century. I'd vacationed in the area all my life, so needless to say, we knew some people. Excuse me. Through these handy connections, I managed to get an address and a phone number, which was unlisted, not only for this family, I should say for this family that the kids had encountered. Now, I thought it was best to introduce the subject and myself by letter rather than by telephone and probably give the guy a heart attack. So on October 22nd, I wrote, and I included every professional reference I could think of so they wouldn't think I was some kind of a nut or publicity seeker. Frankly, I didn't expect an answer before the holidays were over, if at all. But to my amazement, I got a phone call 4 days later from a deeply shaken guy who was the guy in the doorway at the house. And from my notes here, he told me, quote, "This is very difficult for us, but we have to talk to somebody who won't think we're crazy." He sounded like a complete wreck, not knowing, of course, that he evidently had called every one of the clergy, teachers, and doctors I'd given as references just to make sure I was on the up and up. They tell me you're not a publicity hound, he said. We're not going to talk unless you guarantee in writing that you'll keep what we tell you confidential. I kind of thought this was kind of over the wall. I bit my tongue and agreed, because it was 30 years after this they finally wrote about it. I think the statute of limitations is up on that one. So in any case, the man, I found myself going up to visit them and getting the following story. They were a childless couple, early middle age, two very frightened people. They'd said that they had become so frightened of appearances of this of Patricia, whom they would see in transparent form, that they had taken to walking around their own house together, that they didn't want to be alone in their own house. They saw Pat doing things that she dreamed of doing in the house. This is absolutely fascinating to me. First time I'd run into this sort of thing. They had dreamed of her walking down they had seen her walking down the stairs in transparent form. And remember Pat described doing that, and she said something grabbed her attention, but she couldn't figure out what. And they would see her kind of staring, not at them, but through them, as if she kind of felt they were there, but didn't really know. And the thing of the children, they didn't understand what they said. That they didn't know what connection that would have. But they did have the window, the picture window that Pat would look out of in her dreams, and everything that they described to me was what Pat had described to me in her dreams. It was really absolutely amazing. Now, again, sometimes they would witness these apparitions of Pat, this doppelganger, if you will, when they were together, and sometimes when they were individuals, when they were by themselves, when they still had the courage to stay around their own house. Now, when I got there was a for sale sign in front of the place. Now, the results of the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory that Pat took were not indicative that she should seek further treatment for anything. She was, relatively normal person, a little flaky like most of us, but nothing that needed any further treatment. So again, there was nothing to indicate that this was not actually legitimate. And I think what was happening here is certainly a doppelganger case, but one in which different people were experiencing the same parallel worlds. That's how I would interpret it today, especially with the conscious Pat in the dream being the mother and owner of the house, mother of children, separate world. So that's that, and a pretty strange case. We're going to be right back with more cases from behind the paranormal of doppelgangers and doubles and some pretty strange stuff. So stay with us. Be right back.
Join Mystic Radio with Rob and Alexis Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern and 12 noon Pacific for your free on-air readings right here on the Sky. Founder of Metaphysical Mothering, Robin will answer your metaphysical questions, and she'll channel such spirits as Michael Jackson and Mary Magdalene. Listen and call in Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern Time and noon Pacific for your free on-air readings right here on the Sky. And check out Robin's Soul Spa at robinalexis.com.
Know a girl, she puts the color inside of my world. But she's just like a maze, where all of the walls are continually change. And I've done all I can to stand on the steps with my heart in my hand. Now I'm starting to see, maybe it's got nothing to do with me. Fathers, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love like you do. Girls become lovers who turn into mothers. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. See that skin, it's the same she's been standing in since the day she saw him walking away. Now she's left cleaning up the mess he made. So fathers, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love like you do. Girls become lovers who turn into mothers. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. Boys, you can break. You find be good to your daughters too.
CBS Radio's The New Sky. NewSkyRadio.com. Across the Veil with April Lugo.
Join April Lugo each Tuesday night at 7 for Across the Veil. Across the Veil is a show that promises to be a unique experience as April connects and communicates with those who are across the veil. April receives guidance and wisdom from the ancients, angels, masters, teachers, and guides, as well as hearing messages from those who have preceded us across the veil, family, friends, and loved ones alike. The program is an excellent opportunity for you to hear from those who are across the veil. April will be answering questions and giving insight. That's the main reason for the program. Across the Veil at 7 Tuesday on The Sky.
Look up to the sky. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Reach out, NewSkyRadio.com. Psychic Radio is now CBS Radio's The Sky. Back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Call now 248-545-SOUL. NewSkyRadio.com.
Welcome back, and we're talking about the strange phenomenon of the doppelganger or double in the paranormal tonight. And interestingly, on this case we just finished discussing in Maine, as soon as these people met on that front porch at the beginning of the thing, the doppelganger was never seen again. Okay, and I did do some follow-up on that, and never seen again as far as I ever found out. Now, I have another case, this one from England, that seemed to have similar causes. However, I'm going to skip it because we're burning up our hour here too fast. And I want to move on to the subject that I think is very closely related to the doppelganger, and that is the matter of the tulpa, T-U-L-P-A, which can at times be interpreted as a doppelganger. Now, what this tulpa is, it's something that is very common in Tibetan Buddhist spirituality and in some other cultures as well. And it's literally what they believe is the creation or construction by means of mental and psychic exercises, a phantom form, so to speak, that's born completely from the imagination, so they believe. I don't think of it that way. And anyway, yet it's so strongly vitalized by the person who does it, by their visualization and by their will, that it actually becomes visible to other people. There have been modern cases of this. I'm thinking notably of the actual creation of a ghost by students at an Ontario university, where they literally got together and they decided on, this is what this person looks like, this is what her life was like, this is this is that. And they literally created, so they thought, an entity that was so real and solid it could be photographed. All right. And this, to me, was nothing but concentrating and messing around with space-time and ringing the dinner bell for a parasitical entity, which I think this was, because they had a lot of trouble getting rid of it, and that often happens with tulpas. But anyway, that's me. What the heck do I know? Anyway, a tulpa is, according to most beliefs, an extremely powerful example of what occultists term a thought form. And the notion of thought forms turns up in the paranormal a lot. It even turns up in physics. Again, I think generally, sometimes as a parasite, could be a projection of another person, as some people think doppelgangers are. Now, to understand the nature of the tulpa, you have to appreciate that as far as the Tibetan Buddhists and other people are concerned who believe in it, the thought itself is far more than an intellectual function. Every thought, they believe, affects what I guess can be translated as the mind stuff that permeates the world of matter in very much the same way as a stone thrown into a lake kind of makes the ripples upon the water's surface. A thought, in other words, produces a thought ripple. That, in my opinion, is true, but that can penetrate space-time and, again, attract some things you might not want. Now, usually these thought ripples have only a short life. They seem to decay almost as soon as they're created, and they make no lasting impression on the, quote, mind stuff, which is interpenetrating the physical plane. That's how they put it. If, however, the thought is particularly intense, the product of deep passion or fear, or if it is of long duration, the subject of much brooding and meditation, the thought ripple builds into a more permanent thought form, one that has a longer and more intense life, and I might add, a life of its own. There have been a number of Buddhist monks who have done this and have regretted it. certainly doppelgangers sometimes take on lives of their own to the point where they become real pains in the neck and sometimes even physical dangers to those who are involved with them. So I'd say the tulpa is worth study as an example of a thought form as well. Now, I'm going to mention, too, another case. Actually, I'm afraid we're not going to get to this email because it's a good one, and I'll continue in a minute with the main part of the program. But I did want to get to this question, which kind of follows logically from what we've said so far. And this is a question about mirrors. And it's from Petra N. in Mexico City. And Petra writes, I saw the pretty stunning mirror pictures on your website and made a natural jump to your subject tonight. What's the story with mirrors? And can doppelgangers come from mirrors? That's an interesting question, Petra. Thank you for asking. The picture she's referring to, I believe, is probably on newenglandghosts.com. That's our main website. And, actually, it's on that. And it's also on behindtheparanormal.com, our show website. If you look at the, I believe it is. Yeah. And also, if you look at the Facebook page, I don't know, I'm all over the internet here. The Facebook page from the show, there's several case photographs. One of Ben setting up the camera in a basement and a guy who was not there standing under the stairs. Another one is of this mirror that appears to be a portal. Now, we were standing in this room in Connecticut, and there was a lovely mirror on the wall, and we couldn't see with the naked eye what we were taking pictures of, which seemed like a portal with a female figure coming through it. And we took this from many different angles. We took great pains to make sure nothing was reflecting in the mirror at this time. And to the best of our knowledge and belief, something flaky was going on here. So anyway, I think that definitely mirrors have something to do with these strange things. And I don't know as far as how it is. I think maybe we ought to do a separate program on that because we're running out of time here and I got to do the announcements. But thank you for the question, Petra. And I think we will be doing some sort of show, maybe even on mirrors, because they have some interesting abilities apparently, and do some interesting things to our psychic abilities and this sort of thing. So there may be some definitely related stuff going on here. So anyway, I'm afraid we have to cut it short here. Just to remind everybody, check our website, behindtheparanormal.com. You can also buy my books. I hear that? Buy my books. Subscribe to our newsletter. Comes once a week in the email. Or apply to become a reporter at the site. We have 5 wonderful reporters now. We could always use more. Podcasts of all the shows are also available at newskyradio.com on the CBS site or at our site, behindtheparanormal.com. And I want to thank our producer, Will Kosnick. And we'll see you right here next Sunday, April 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on CBS New Sky Radio. newskyradio.com on the internet, when we will welcome, for the first time, George P. Hansen, brilliant author, speaker, and paranormal aficionado, for a discussion of the trickster and the paranormal. Anybody familiar with any sort of native points of view from around the world or more traditional societies is familiar with the notion of the trickster. Very, very strange, kind of scary at times. And George's book, which is about as thick as the King James Bible, talks about this phenomenon, and he relates it to all areas of society and human belief, and it's absolutely brilliant. And I'm looking forward to this show. It would be an unusual one. Don't miss it. In the meantime, check out our Saturday show, 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific, on WOON 1240 a.m. in southeastern New England, and on onworldwide.com. Also, you can hear rebroadcasts of Behind the Paranormal on Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific, right here on CBS New Sky Radio. And I'm going to leave you with a quote here from the comedian Stephen Wright. And he says, 2 babies were born on the same day at the same hospital, not necessarily doppelgangers. They lay there and looked at each other. Their families came back and took them away. 80 years later, by bizarre coincidence, they lay in the same hospital on their deathbeds next to each other. One of them looked at each other. One of them looked at the other and said, "So, what did you think?" All right, pretty good. And I just want to tell you, stay tuned for our friends from Caps Paranormal. And we'll see you next week here on Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. And Ben will be back.